Hi, this is Mick Geek and I'm Dan, and welcome to things people don't tell you about replacing an MX5 hood, or at least things I didn't find in videos I watched. There are lots of videos, they make it seem pretty easy. It is not that difficult, but there are a number of things that raise questions. Getting to this part isn't that difficult. This is, the old hood has been removed, so I've just got the bare frame here, and doing that, getting it out, following the instructions, pretty straightforward stuff. I would definitely recommend being in a position where you don't have to do this whole job in one day. You can, but life is definitely easier if you can afford to have the car secure for a couple of days whilst you figure things out. And I say that because I have run into a few questions and issues, things that I ended up ordering new parts for and such. So let's run through a few of those. The first thing that probably has caused the most consternation in my process is that all over the frame in different places there's this like horrible dead foamy sticky stuff, like weather stripping or something, that sort of exists underneath some of the seals, on top of some of the seals. I'm not sure how much was part of the original roof design and how much was other people adding it in 20 years to try and remedy other issues. It clearly could do with replacing, but I have no idea what this material is. I've bought a roll of a couple of different types of weather strip in case I can try and replace it. I'm not sure this is really the right thickness, but yeah, I assume that at least some of that needs to go back. The other thing is there's lots of places where they talk about the little tree connectors. I don't know if we've got an old one in here. Little panel things. These are called plastic rivets or something, or fir tree plastic things, and you have to pull a bunch of these out, and they are a pain to get out, and you should not plan to keep them. Where possible, just use some flush trim cutters or whatever. If you can get into behind them, just cut them the hell off, and do yourself a favour, buy a pack of new ones. It takes 5mm ones. Another thing I didn't realise is there's like 3 or 4 different sizes of these things. But the 5mm ones seem to fit, and just whacking a few of these back in place should be much easier. What else has been? I mean, I took the opportunity to use some lithium grease on all of the little joints and kind of work it in there. That seemed useful. There are a bunch of places over this whole thing that had little spots of rust, nothing desperate, but like enough that if you kind of hit it with sandpaper or a bit of a Dremel, it clearly flaked away very much. So I knocked back all those little spots, did a respray of primer and paint, just to try and mitigate some of that stuff. And of course that all then takes time to dry, so if you do want to take the chance to do those sorts of maintenance whilst you're at it, you're definitely going to want time. The rubber seals, how good is good enough? I mean, these are old. I think they're in pretty good shape. In this case, this is another one that has bits of random foam tape in places that I'm like, was that part of the original design? Or should I replace this? Should I peel it off and not replace it? I don't know. I got some of this stuff called Gummy Fledge, which I read is good for helping rubber components kind of have a bit more life to them. I have no idea if it's really done a good job. It cleaned them. Hopefully that was enough. You can buy new sets of these for like £100, which is quite a lot of money for considering the rest of the thing. But the thing that confused me probably the most is that there are these 2 rubber components on each side of the roof that no one seems to talk about. I can't find what these are called. I can't find any way to buy new ones. They are kind of munged up in the edges where they obviously squish together. Do I need new ones? I don't know. I'm gonna leave that as is. Obviously, this is kind of a hassle job, so you can't be like, I want to fix things whilst I fix things. One of those things I kind of was warned going in was the tension cables. I bought new tension cables thinking it might as well replace them, and when I got to it, the existing ones had long snapped and rusted. I assume that contributed in some various ways to the deterioration of the original roof. And whilst I was at it, I did take a chance to clean up the latches. Not dramatic. I had a bunch of little kind of white pitted marks on mine which I just assume is over time, little impacts or rust or whatever. So I just knocked it back with some sandpaper and resprayed with some black metal paint and some clear coat, which at least superficially makes them look nice and clean and new, and I might as well do that. I saw various instructions that said to take these off. Take these off to do the job. I took them off to paint them, but they are very much independent of the roof liner setup. So there you go. That's so far things that people, or I didn't find people telling me. I am now going to attempt to put the new material on. Oh, the other thing people don't tell me, or I've not found a reference for. I bought a new roof, and a lot of people say, hey, you should probably get a new rain rail. If you're doing that, the rain rail tends to fail on these things. Makes sense. So the place I bought the roof material from, that was just an added extra. New rain rail, great. The new rain rail does not look like the old rain rail. Let me fetch it. This is the new rain rail. Now the old rain rail is a very obvious plastic guttering thing. It's a relatively stiff plastic, which I think is why it fails, that is riveted to the back edge of the old hood. This has a flat piece of plastic stitched to, I assume, vinyl material, and that vinyl material has this stitched edge which has come some kind of tape backing, which I assume is important to the weatherproofing. But I'm not really sure which way round to put this because this clearly is the thing that needs to fold to make the gutter, but that puts this seam line right at the bottom pretty much of that structure, and that seems a bit weird to me, and I'm still not quite sure. Should I put it so that the hard plastic is against the car and this loops up this way, or put this against the car and loop in so that half of the gutter against this hard plastic? I am still not sure. And again, like a lot of, if you do searches online for rain guttering, then they will basically the pictures of the original. The place I bought this from had instructions, and their instructions say we supply rain rails if you don't want to keep your rain rail, but then basically proceed to assume that you have both kept your original rain rail and it is just installed on the car. There's no real instruction. So maybe it will become obvious when I get back to putting it on the car. We'll see. For now, I'm going to clear the decks, put down some protective paper, put the new hood material down, and start looking at getting it reattached. New hood material, white paper to try and keep backside clean. First step is this bow retainer. This front kind of cross beam has that little metal thing that we had to pry the old hood out of. New hood is a little bit different. The original had a flap that ran kind of over the previous bow and I think under or over this bow and wrapped around, whereas this hood just has a little flap here. So I think that this is the right orientation, that it kind of flaps up around and then tucks back under. I flexed the whole bow retainer metal clip up to kind of make that easy to do. And I'm now going to crimp it down and assume that that is the correct way to do this. It may or may not have been, but I think one of the things this does is gives you an opportunity to kind of get this centered. You can kind of check that each end is about even, and then just crimp down on this. I think there's like a little tab at the end of the fabric that gets caught and helps to hold everything in place. Right. So I think that's good, and it sets kind of the distance for this. Now this is the last thing you do, I think, is reattach the front, but I was just checking that these holes line up with where they're going to go. It seems about centered, so I think we're good. And now we need to figure out the next part, which I think is to flap these edges up and clip them back onto these posts. A couple more question marks, but also a realization this isn't the next thing to do. The next thing to do is get this threaded through here whilst it's flat. But whilst this clearly is shaped to go over this edge, there are no pre-marked holes on this bit. Like everywhere else that's going to be riveted has holes marked. This is going to have one screw and two fabric things, plastic rivets through it. There's no holes for them already in the canvas. I guess I just have to make them when I get to that point. But also, this piece obviously needs to end up here, but these holes feel like they are quite far away from where they need to be. That might just be the way the roof is currently stacked. It's not currently natural. We'll see. But yes, let's get this fish through. So it came most of the way to about here, and then really didn't want to be pushed further. But I found this this tool helped me just reach in and hook this hook, pull it forwards. So that tucks in through here, and will be attached to a tension spring. I actually bought new tension springs as well whilst I was at it. It also made it much easier to remove the old stuff. Just to unscrew it, I will screw those back in shortly. But I think the next thing to do is this pillar. So this. Now, is that true? No, that clearly isn't true. I clearly do need to get the tension spring on there because I'm just going to cover this whole thing up and not together. Get into it. So that's the tension spring fitted. That was, as imagined, pretty fiddly to put back. It might be easier with somebody else to help keep the frame concertinaed, but I was fiddling around. Of course, it's one of those fitting jobs that I got it on relatively quickly, then realised from a little mark on the frame that I obviously had the arm of the spring reversed to its previous installation. I don't know that it matters, but for the sake of consistency, I then took it off and did it again. And of course, it was way harder to do the second time. But anyway, that is now in place. I'll need to do the same on the other side. But I think now, he says for the third time, now we can think about doing this. Seated the screws. The light here doesn't look very good, does it? Seated the screw, and now I just need to figure out where the plastic rivets go and drill through the fabric, I guess. So a little bit of fiddling, a little bit of going back and forth from what I thought was the right way to do stuff, but I think given the way it's all holding and laying now that I'm on the right path. That's all of the rivets done. So I think we're now basically into the reinstallation of the aluminium channels and the rubber seals for the last fitting of this stuff, and then the front. I might just double check if there's a suggested order between those two things. I think it probably doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay, so I quickly looked it up, and according to Underdog Garage video, which is probably the primary source I've used among the various I've looked at, they installed these pillars, and I think these, then glued the front to install the third rail here. So I guess I might as well do that. Right, so what I need to do... so this is another one of those places that has gummy furry strip that no one talks about. So I'm inclined to replace this with the weather stripping I have, rather than, because this is just seriously deteriorated. So back to the theme of things people don't tell you. What do you do here? Like, it's clearly this is some kind of worn, I don't know if it was a double-sided adhesive, maybe it was only a single-sided adhesive. It didn't stick too dramatically to the vinyl, but at the same time, what is it for? So I've peeled off whatever was there and have replaced it with a 25mm wide, 1mm thick foam weather stripping double-sided thing. So I'm hoping difficult to locate these screws back into their plastic housing, because of course they'll screw in around the corners of it. Let's check. Okay, rails reinstalled. That was all fairly straightforward. We'll see how well the extra weather stripping works, whether it was required, I have no idea. But it felt like it ought to be replenished, so I have replenished it. Next up, I'll put this rubber in and this rubber in, and then we can do the front. I'm procrastinating on the front because this bit with the gluing is kind of the only permanent thing. Everything else feels very easy to undo if I really needed to, but once I've kind of glued this in place, that feels a bit more difficult to unwind. Anyway. Again, more of this foam stuff, like, should I be added? I don't know. So the question is, what is the best way to reseat this? Okay, so I'm pretty sure this is reseated now, because you can't see the aluminium channel at the back here anymore, and it's tucked right tight up against that. So I think that's good. Had to be fairly forceful to get it back all the way in, which makes sense. I think that's one seal refitted. Now that leaves these top bits to go in. See how easy this is. Of course, you need a hammer to whack them in, but I could do with a wee billet of aluminium that I thought would fit. Okay, well that's that one. Rear and middle rubbers reinstalled, I think, pretty well. Now for the front. So this tab glues over, and I guess this tab comes over. I think I would like to at least get this kind of clipped a little bit in place first, just to see.
Nobody tells you how many times you're going to drop the screws, that's for sure. And indeed, nobody says those cute little glass ramekins that you thought you should put your screws in to hold them whilst you were working are a great idea until you leave them on the same bench that you're working on and knock them off and shatter them into 100 pieces whilst also scattering all those carefully collected screws. I think that's an important tip that people should probably mention more often. Right. I'm actually just gonna tighten this up. See, as I once again procrastinate actually doing the final step that requires commitment. Some epoxy to kind of hold this down and try and keep this corner in. I guess that's the thing. So a clamp, some epoxy to hold all that nice and tight. I say epoxy, I've got some like super duper all fabric, all singing, all dancing glue. So we'll do that. Hopefully that will keep that whole front thing correct. So okay, we have Stix All Extreme Power, bonds and seals virtually everything. So it's a glue and a sealant, which seemed like it would be fitting. I also have spreader things, some clamps and some cardboard to use so that the clamps don't mark the top surface. Let's see if we can do something appropriate here. So I want to make sure that this is a nice line. Getting this into a tucked corner is going to be tricky, but we'll see. So they covered one surface, so I think what I'm going to do is apply it to the steel. Both ends glued up. Nobody tells you you're going to want 4 spring clamps. I basically took one clamp off this after I put the aluminium back in to pin it down anyway. So that let me use that one over here again. So now I need to put the aluminium rail on here, then leave it for the glue to actually set before putting the last of the rubbers on, and then I can reinstate the latches. We're pretty much good to go, or at least up to the point where I have to figure out how that rain rail works. Also, nobody tells you what a pain in the ass it is to try and support this in various orientations off the car. I haven't really come up with a good strategy. At the moment it's just resting across the bed. I wanted to make sure that I had stretched this all out. It looks fine. So yeah, I think I just need to let these corners set. And then tomorrow, I'll try and fit it to the car. Oh, and there's one more thing I nearly forgot to tell you that's really important that no one tells you about replacing an outside hood. And that is the importance of staying hydrated. Safety first. It is the next day. I've just taken the clamps off. That looks pretty good to me, I think. So just install the last rubber rail on each side, and then we're ready to I actually have to attach it back to the car. Last bracket. What's it been? See, I don't tell you that pulling them out is really easy. You just ease them out. But getting them back in, it's not that it's difficult, it's just really, it's kind of difficult to see whether or not you've actually got it all the way in the right places. So, you end up going back and forth a bit. Screws again, as is tradition. Alright. Probably time to take this outside. So, yep, I have a hard top. I confess I actually bought this hard top basically exclusively so that I would have the ability to keep this secure whilst I spent time doing the soft top. I do think it will be useful during the winter, and I do think it looks very good with the hard top on it, but fundamentally most of the time this is going to be a top-down soft top car, that's the point. Anyway, so I now need to get this off, remove all the bits of trim that need to be removed, and then we can start reinstalling. Let's go.
So backwards.
This is the bit that I have been very unsure about. I think that this goes this way. This is immediately unsure. No, it goes this way. So that would mean that this goes in like here. Okay, with that in place, I'm pretty certain that that has to be the way round it goes. Pretty certain. Because this would make sense to be the waterproof side. So, yeah, we'll proceed on that basis. This is the gummy fledge stuff I mentioned earlier. The instructions aren't terribly clear, but I read somewhere or saw someone mention to rub it in, so put on some gloves and just kind of give all the rubber seals, particularly this one where it meets the rain rail, a bit of a going over. So another thing that no one tells you, this is where the rain rail fabric meets this rail on the top, and there is a rubberish flap. I don't know if you can see this. There's multiple levels to this, right? So you've got this rubber bit on the top, and there's like a groove in here, and then a rubber flap that is a little bit inflexible, but this rubber flap. And so the question is, should the rain rail that you fit sit in front of this rubber flap or behind it? Part of me thinks it should go up in this groove, but it doesn't really sit high enough for that. So I think I'm going to err on the side of having it behind this rubber flap, assuming that any water will come in and down like that. I think. Okay, so we're about as far as long as we can get. The rain rail is basically in place, ready to accept the hood. Obviously all the trim has been taken back so I can bolt the hood back in. I've gone around all of the rubber seals everywhere I can find, even in the boot with the gummy fledge, just to make sure I've done that. I've done a side mission to run wires. Next thing is to put the hood on, but important. The other thing that people don't remember to tell you in these videos is take a break. Take a break. The next part is going to be probably hot and frustrating and awkward. And there is a strong temptation to just rush on and get on with it, but it's time to sit down and have a sandwich, take a break, so that I will hopefully be in the best possible mindset for the next bit and not get too frustrated. We'll see how that works out, but yeah, take a break. Okay, first things first, metal brackets are back in place so that I don't have to feed them in once the roof is on. Now let's go get the roof. Well, to be fair, everyone tells you how aggravating and hard that's going to be. Waiting for a nice, sunny, warm, pleasant day makes a lot of sense if you're having the roof off, but boy, when you're fiddling around and hide underneath this with the glass window and everything, and trying to get all those holes to line up at the same time, that was every bit as aggravating as I expected. But we're there now, and I will give you one other thing that nobody tells you about changing your hood. When you're putting the nuts in these side pieces, if you let go of that nut and it doesn't quite thread on and it drops onto the deck, the same mechanism that makes sure that rain is neatly directed into little recesses draws those nuts the same way. And in fact there's a little pocket underneath the plastic rain rail guard that just swallows nuts in a place you just cannot get them back. I have lost 3, I think, in that side. I may or may not ever see them again. It was very frustrating. But for now, we've got everything connected, we've got the tension straps in. I'm going to refit the flaps, and I guess we'll have a go at shutting the roof. And then I just need to put the trim back on. Whew. That was not easy. I'm hoping this will stretch out. I want to rest now. I was not entirely ready for how hard it was going to be to even get the latches to engage, to try and pull it tight. I've backed them off all the way, and there's a big old gap here at the moment, so it will definitely want to be pulled in, but for now, first attachment, I think it just needs time to stretch into position a little. So I
backed off all of the bolts a little bit on the rain rail and on the door, just to give myself maximum flexibility to kind of pull it into this position. And now I think I'm going to leave it like that for a bit, to sort of sit and rest and think about what it's done. Yes, gonna have a drink, and then I will come back and I'll probably tighten up at least the door, the main pillar bolts. And we'll see how we go on before I finish tightening the rain rail. Whew. So it's the next day, it's all done. Feeling a bit achy and tired from doing it all. But trim's all reinstalled, everything looks good. And so for one last thing that none of those other videos tell you about reinstalling an MX-5 hood, is that you'll put all this work and effort into doing it, and then the very first thing you're going to do is put it down and go for a drive.